Saturday, June 17th, 1933, Union Station, Kansas City, Missouri. Morning heat clings to the air as four federal officers escort a shackled Frank Jelly Nash across the pavement. Steam hisses from a nearby locomotive, mixing with the echoing footsteps of lawmen who believe they are moments away from returning one of America's most wanted fugitives to federal custody. But the platform is too quiet, too still, and then hell opens its mouth. A Ford sedan glides up, slow and deliberate, but before anyone can react, the doors open and three Thompson submachine guns roar, spitting fire at the officers and their prisoner. And in seconds, the air fills with smoke, shattered glass, and the screams of the dying. The attack is surgical, vicious, and unrelenting. When the chaos settles, the four lawmen and their prisoner lie dead. The country will never forget the brutality of what would soon be called the Kansas City Massacre. And in the shadows of this blood-soaked morning stood a powerful figure whose name echoed through Kansas City's underworld: John Lazia, Brother John, the suave political fixer, gangland broker, and the man many believe to be the quiet architect behind the city's criminal empire, and the man who had sanctioned this particular hit. Welcome back to James on the Mob. I'm James Jenkins, your host and narrator. In this episode, we go back to KC, Kansas City, to cover the city's first modern-era boss. John Lazia didn't see himself as a gangster. He saw himself as a loyal lieutenant in the most powerful political machine in the state of Missouri, run by the very man who almost certainly ordered his execution. This is the story of the Al Capone of Kansas City. But it's not just a story of bootlegging and gambling. It's the story of a new American-style organized crime, built on an unprecedented fusion of politics and violence, a machine that made John Lazia one of the most powerful men in the country. And then, to save itself in the aftermath of the Kansas City Massacre, the machine demanded his brutal elimination. John Lazia was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1896. By 1915, he was in Kansas City living a double life, an office clerk by day, an armed robber by night. In 1916, his criminal career almost ended before it began. He was arrested for armed robbery and sentenced to 12 to 15 years in prison. For any other 20-year-old, this would have been the end. For Lazia, it was a job interview. After serving as little as 8 or 9 months, Lazia was paroled in 1917. This was no simple act of mercy. The parole was granted by Missouri's lieutenant governor, a friend of the city's burgeoning political boss, Tom Pendergast. Another Pendergast affiliate, Phil McRory, even testified as a character witness. This was a strategic recruitment by the Pendergast machine. The Pendergast machine's origins can be traced to Thomas Pendergast's older brother, James Pendergast. In 1894, a young Tom Pendergast moved to Kansas City to join James, a successful businessman and saloon owner who had become a Democratic committeeman in the city's first ward. James built a power base by using his political influence to keep police pressure off the saloons he owned and by freeing his constituents from jail for minor crimes. This grassroots loyalty was the blueprint for the machine. The Pendergasts used their organization to provide jobs for working-class immigrants, a practice criticized by reformers, but welcomed by those who were otherwise shut out of employment opportunities. When James Pendergast died in 1911, his younger brother Thomas took control of the machine. By 1915, Tom Pendergast had left his city council seat to focus on his unelected but far more powerful role as the leader of the Jackson County Democratic Club, the formal organization of the Pendergast machine. And over the next decade, Pendergast would consolidate his control over Kansas City and extend his influence into state and national politics, famously helping a young Harry S. Truman get elected as a county judge in 1922 and later as a U.S. Senator in 1934. The Pendergast machine, run by Irish Americans, needed a new kind of operative, a bright, ruthless, Italian American who could organize and deliver the Italian vote on Kansas City's north side. The parole Lazia was granted was on the transparently false condition that Lazia joined the U.S. Army. Lazia flagrantly ignored the condition. He was supposed to be sent back to prison for violating parole. Instead, he started working for the political machine. He was not a gangster who bought political protection. He was a political operative whose job was to organize crime. When Lazia entered the scene, the Kansas City underworld already had founders. Joseph Joe Church and Peter Sugarhouse Pete DiGiovanni were Sicilian mafiosi who had founded the local crime family in 1912. With Prohibition, they formed the Sugarhouse Syndicate, a cooperative that controlled the region's sugar supply, the primary ingredient for illicit liquor. They became the only group bootlegging alcohol in Kansas City. The DiGiovanni brothers were the producers, but Lazia was the protection. Lazia's first assignment was as an organizer under Michael Ross, Pendergast, Irish-American captain for the Fifth Ward, Little Italy. Lazia learned the system, then staged a coup. In 1928, on a special election day, Lazia kidnapped several of Ross's top lieutenants. It was an open declaration of war on a Pendergast ally. Had Pendergast backed Ross, Lazia would have been arrested or killed. Instead, Pendergast's silence signaled his approval. Ross's men defected, Ross conceded, and Pendergast accepted Lazia as his new support in the North End. Immediately, Lazia founded the Northside Democratic Club at 500 Grand Street. It was the official headquarters for his new unified political and criminal operation. The Pendergast-Lazia Compact was born. The deal that defined Kansas City in the Prohibition era was simple: votes for protection. Lazia's job was to deliver votes. From his club, he claimed he could control 7,500 Italian votes. On election days, his men would make sure people voted for the Pendergast slate, leading to turnout that sometimes surpassed the number of registered voters. In exchange, Pendergast gave Lazia free rein. His empire of bootleg whiskey, upscale gambling resorts, and loan sharking was sanctioned by the city. His legitimate fronts, like the Glendale Bottling Company and the Cuban Gardens nightclub, were untouched. The protection was so total that historians note Kansas City authorities did not make one single alcohol-related felony arrest during all of Prohibition. This new power dynamic reshaped the mob itself. The DiGiovannis were still the founders of the Kansas City Mafia, but Lazia's political immunity was now the organization's most valuable asset. Around 1931, the leadership was formalized. Historical lists showed Joseph DiGiovanni's reign as boss ending and John Lazia's beginning. This wasn't a hostile takeover, it was a strategic Americanization. The old world Sicilian DiGiovannis succeeded public leadership to the new New York-born American-style boss, Lazia, who could perfectly interface with Pendergast's Irish-American political machine. Lazia's real trade was managing the DiGiovanni's criminal operations. Lazia's unique position elevated him to the national stage. In May 1929, he was the designated Kansas City representative at the Atlantic City Conference, a historic summit to form a national crime syndicate. Lazia sat at the table with men like Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, and Meyer Lansky. The conference registry listed his assets. He represented both the Balistreri gang, his criminal crew, and the Pendergast machine, his political power. His offer to the new syndicate was something no one else had: a wide open town, a sanctuary city where fugitives could hide, rackets could run, and bosses could meet, all guaranteed by a completely captured police department. Lazia quickly proved his value as a national player. In 1930, a bloody bootleg war was raging in Colorado between the established Pueblo-based Carlino family and the rising Denver-based Roma Smaldone group. Lazia intervened decisively. He dispatched a team of his top lieutenants, including his young protege, Charles Benaggio, to aid the Denver crime family. This wasn't a local favor. It was a proxy battle in the national Castellammarese War. The Carlino family was allied with New York's boss of bosses, Salvador Maranzano. Lazia's allies from the Atlantic City Conference, Luciano and Lansky, were Maranzano's enemies. On September 10, 1931, Salvador Maranzano was assassinated in his New York office. And on the exact same day, his Colorado ally, Pete Carlino, was assassinated in Pueblo. The synchronization was terrifying. It confirmed Lazia was a regional enforcer for the new, victorious faction of the National Syndicate. Back home, Lazia's power reached its absolute peak. In 1932, Pendergast backed legislation that gave the city manager control over Kansas City's police department. This state capture made Lazia the shadow chief of police. He was given an office in police headquarters. He had the approval of all hires and fires. He proceeded to staff the force with his own men, hiring between 70 and 150 ex-convicts as uniform officers. The Kansas City PD was no longer just corrupt, it was a uniform wing of his organization. But this perfect protection system was about to collapse, brought down by a crime of spectacular arrogance. June 17, 1933, Lazia's sanctuary city became the stage for a national nightmare, the Kansas City Massacre. A gang led by Vern Miller, an ex-South Dakota cop turned gangster, was attempting to free or assassinate federal prisoner Frank Jelly Nash and opened fire on Nash and the lawman at Union Station. The gunmen, identified as Miller, Charles Pretty Boy Floyd, and Adam Ricchetti, slaughtered the 5 men. Nash himself, FBI Special Agent Raymond Caffrey, Oklahoma Police Chief Otto Reed, and Kansas City Police Department officers W.J. Grooms and Frank Hermanson. Lazia's fingerprints were all over the plot. First, the plot. It's alleged that Vern Miller had been placed in touch with the killers by the gambling czar John Lazia. Second, the leak. The gunman had precise operational details. The only logical source was Lazia's network inside the Kansas City Police Department, leveraging his virtual control and his office in their headquarters. Third, the cover-up. Lazia used his influence to help hide the perpetrators from conviction by manipulating the investigation, using his Kansas City Police Department cronies to detail the probe and help the killers escape the city. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The murder of an FBI agent brought unprecedented federal scrutiny crashing down on Pendergast's wide-open town. The public was outraged. John Lazia, the man who had organized the plot and the cover-up, was the one man who could definitively link the Pendergast machine to a federal crime. He had gone from Pendergast's greatest asset to his single greatest liability. The pragmatic Tom Pendergast moved to cut his losses. First, Lazia's political protection vanished. He was suddenly indicted for bootlegging, illegal gambling, and tax evasion. Second, Pendergast issued a politically deniable death sentence. He started funding a competitor, a former Lazia lieutenant named Michael LeCapra, to instigate an internal gang war. The hope was that LeCapra would kill Lazia, or Lazia would kill LeCapra. Either way, Pendergast's problem would be solved with plausible deniability. But the situation was complex. In March 1934, Pendergast faced a near defeat from a powerful reform movement. Even as a liability, Lazia was still a necessary tool. Pendergast unleashed Lazia's hoodlums one last time for the bloody election. Lazia's thugs waged a campaign of open terror. 4 people were murdered, hundreds were beaten, and an estimated 100,000 felonies were committed in a single day, securing a resounding Pendergast victory. This final violent service sealed Lazia's fate. He had proven once again that he was horseman number 2, far too powerful, far too knowledgeable to be left alive. Pendergast's proxy war had failed. A more direct method was now necessary. In the pre-dawn darkness of July 10, 1934, a car pulled into the driveway of the Park Central Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri. Inside were John Lazia, the 37-year-old political and criminal boss of the city's north side, his wife Marie, and his driver bodyguard, Charlie the Wop Carollo. As Lazia stepped out of the vehicle, two gunmen emerged from the shadows of nearby bushes. They unleashed a hellish barrage from a Thompson submachine gun and a shotgun. Lazia was struck 8 times, his body torn apart. Rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, the dying mob boss lingered for 12 hours. In those final moments, he revealed the central paradox of his entire life. He turned to his doctor, genuinely bewildered, and whispered, "Doc, what I can't understand is why anybody would do this to me. Why to me, Johnny Lazia, who's been a friend to everybody?" His final words were not for his wife or his crew. They were a message of undying, tragic loyalty. "Tell Tom Pendergast I love him." Lazia's funeral was a spectacle. An estimated 10,000 mourners filed past his silver-lined casket. The procession, which included 120 cars just for the flowers, moved from Holy Rosary Church to his burial at Mount St. Mary's Cemetery. The city mourned Brother John, the benevolent political patron, but the underworld knew the truth. Lazia's crew immediately blamed rival Michael LaCapra. This was the convenient public theory Pendergast had designed, but suspicion also fell on the unharmed driver and underboss, Charles Carollo, who immediately succeeded Lazia as boss. But the Rosetta Stone that solves the murder is the critical piece of forensic evidence. Multiple sources report that law enforcement traced some of the bullets in Lazia's body to bullets found in the Union Station massacre. One report is unequivocal. The gun which fired the fatal bullets had been used a year earlier in the Union Station massacre. This ballistic match invalidates the LaCapra theory. A rival like LaCapra would not possess one of the hot machine guns from the massacre. The only people who would have had a specific high-profile weapon were the very men Lazia had protected during the cover-up, his own crew. LaCapra was later found murdered on August 18, 1935, while hiding out in upstate New York. The conclusion is inescapable. John Lazia was assassinated by his own men. Tom Pendergast, the political patron, gave the order to silence the man who linked him to the massacre. Charles Carollo, the ambitious underboss, was the instrument. He personally oversaw the hit from the driver's seat and used Lazia's own men and the very gun that made the execution necessary to carry it out. John Lazia's death created a power vacuum, but his blueprint for power endured. His immediate successor, Charles Carollo, ruled until 1939, when he, like Tom Pendergast, were convicted of tax evasion. The true heir to Lazia's empire was his original protege, Charles Benaggio. Benaggio, who had wept as a pallbearer at his mentor's funeral, served as Carollo's underboss, and in 1939, he slid into the big chair. Benaggio inherited Lazia's dangerous idea, the total fusion of organized crime and machine politics. He simply escalated it, attempting to expand Lazia's control of a city to an attempt to control the entire state of Missouri. This ambition, this inheritance from Brother John, led Benaggio to the exact same fate as his mentor, a brutal, unsolved 1950 assassination, executed, again, by his own Syndicate allies. I've done a previous video on Charlie Benaggio, and if you've enjoyed this one, I invite you to sit back and watch the video on Charlie Benaggio. So goes the story of John Lazia. Lazia's career was a watershed moment. He was a new breed of American gangster, a man who understood that in a wide open town, the man who controls the votes and the police is more powerful than the man who just controls the rackets. He was the perfect political criminal, loyal to the very end, executed not in spite of his loyalty, but because of it. And in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on Brother John. I'm James Jenkins. If you enjoyed this episode, come on, guy, break that thumb, subscribe, and share. And stay tuned for the next episode of James on the Mob. And remember, life is short, so don't whack it off. See yous.